At a friend's birthday party, William brought his mistress along. The young girl looked at me and said in an innocent and lively tone, "I heard from William that the American coffee made by Sister Emma is absolutely amazing. May I have the honor to taste it today?" William raised his chin at me and ordered, "What are you standing there for? Go make coffee." I got up and walked out of the banquet hall. And I never went back. The friend's birthday party was held at his own villa. Originally, William told me that he would pick me up and go to the party together after he came back from the company in the evening, but in the evening, he called and said that he would ask the driver to take me there. He didn't explain to me why he suddenly changed the plan, and I didn't ask either. Our relationship had always been like this. He never had to explain his actions to me. However, as soon as I entered the banquet hall, I felt the faint glances cast from all around. There were looks of those who were watching the show, gossiping, and also sympathetic ones. Soon, I understood the reason. I saw William, who was chatting with the host. And there was a pretty girl affectionately holding his arm. A sharp pain stabbed my heart and spread all over my body. Only then did I understand why William had broken his promise. He didn't pick me up because he was bringing someone else. I didn't understand. Since he had chosen to bring his mistress to the party, why did he still ask me to come? Did he have to humiliate me in public like this? I stood there, frozen for a long time. Perhaps sensing my gaze, William turned around. Seeing me, he didn't show any guilty expression. Instead, he greeted me casually and nodded at me. "You're here." On the contrary, the host beside him was extremely embarrassed, and the smile on his face looked particularly awkward. "Sister-in-law is here. Sit anywhere you like. Make yourself at home." The young girl who had been holding William's arm blinked and looked at me as if she had understood something. The girl was really pretty, young and fresh, and even her tone of speech seemed innocent and lively. "I heard from William that the American coffee made by Sister Emma is absolutely amazing. May I have the honor to taste it today?" My heart tightened, and my nails unconsciously dug into my palms. William had a calm expression and turned his head to ask the person beside him, "Do you have a coffee machine at home?" The host's breathing became a bit quicker. He secretly glanced at me, wiped the sweat from his temple, and said through gritted teeth, "Yes, it's in the pantry over there." William raised his chin at me and ordered, "What are you standing there for? Go make coffee." In an instant, the originally lively banquet hall fell into a deathly silence. Everyone lowered their heads and secretly looked at me from the corner of their eyes. I forced myself to endure the embarrassment and looked at William, just in time to meet his teasing gaze. I paused for a moment and then turned and walked towards the side of the hall. "Hurry up," William added. I didn't say a word and didn't stop walking. I didn't go to the pantry to make coffee. I had been to this friend's house once with William before, so I had a general understanding of the layout of the house. I walked through the pantry, opened the back door, and came to the back garden. Walking along the winding path, I went out through the side door of the villa's garden. The driver who had brought me here had already left. I ordered a car on the taxi-hailing app. After the driver accepted the order, he called me. He said that he had been here before and that this villa area didn't allow outside vehicles to enter. He asked if I could wait for him at the gate. I said yes. This villa area was really big. After walking for a while, my feet in high heels became sore. I took off my shoes and held them in my hand, walking barefoot forward. The small stones on the ground would occasionally prick the soles of my feet, causing a slight stinging pain. But I felt my steps were lighter, and as I walked, I even started to jog. The scenery beside me was receding, just like those past fragments, getting farther and farther away from me. I felt as if the shackles on me were slowly falling off. I felt lighter and lighter. When I reached the gate, I was barefoot, with messy hair and looking rather disheveled. But when I saw the car waiting there, I couldn't help smiling. The headlights shining directly were very bright and a bit dazzling. But they dispelled the dark clouds that had surrounded me for years. In the thick night, I suddenly saw the light and felt that everything became clear. As soon as I got home, William called. "How long are you going to take to make a cup of coffee?" "I didn't promise to make coffee for you," I replied calmly. "Besides, I've already gone home." William laughed angrily. "Emma, you've got guts now?" I was too lazy to say more and hung up the phone directly. Back in the bedroom, I started packing my luggage. The villa of William's family was very big, with more than a dozen rooms upstairs and downstairs. However, the space that belonged to me was only half of a bed and one compartment of the wardrobe. Apart from the gorgeous dresses that William had prepared for me to attend parties, I had very few clothes of my own. It took me more than an hour to pack everything into 2 suitcases, one big and one small. That night, William didn't come back and didn't call again. The next day was Sunday, which was also the day when I met Oliver every week. Early in the morning, I went downstairs to the living room and waited. I waited until after 9 o'clock, but my mother-in-law didn't send Oliver over. I called the old house. The servant stammered, "Sir came over this morning and said that he would take the young master to the amusement park to play." I hung up the phone with a bitter smile. William was punishing me for being disobedient yesterday. He always knew how to manipulate me. Oliver was the child I gave birth to after a difficult labor, and he was the person I cared about the most. I cherished the only one day a week when I could see Oliver. But as long as I made William the slightest bit unhappy, he wouldn't let me see Oliver until I bowed my head and gave in. I took a deep breath, prepared myself mentally, and dialed William's number. It only rang twice before the other side hung up. I dialed again, and his phone was already turned off. I thought about it and, on a whim, dialed Oliver's phone watch. Unexpectedly, it got through. "Hello? Mom." A childish voice came. My heart softened, and I asked softly, "Oliver, when will you come back?" "Mom is waiting for you at the old house, don't go back." "I want to ride the merry-go-round," the child refused flatly. I said gently, "But we haven't seen each other for a whole week. Mom misses you so much." "Don't you miss Mom?" "No," came the hopweoyu answer. "It's okay. Then you play first. Mom will wait for you." "I'm not going back. Dad said that he would take me to live in a tent and watch fireflies tonight." With that, the other side hung up the phone in a hurry. I sighed and walked out with my suitcase. Originally, I wanted to see Oliver before leaving. However, it seemed that he didn't want to see me at all. After all, our mother-son bond was rather shallow. In this way, there was no one and nothing in William's family that I was reluctant to part with. Well, that's good. I could leave freely. In the eyes of outsiders, I was William's lawfully wedded wife. We had a grand wedding. But only William's family and I knew that strictly speaking, William and I were not really a couple because we didn't get a marriage certificate. Back then, when my grandmother was seriously ill, she was worried about me who hadn't graduated yet. She forced the eldest son of the William family to marry me by using the favor that my grandfather had done for the William family in the past. At that time, William's grandfather, worried about the reputation of the William family, reluctantly agreed. My grandmother was afraid that they would go back on their word, so as soon as I graduated, she asked for the wedding to be held immediately. I also told my grandmother that I didn't have to marry the young master of the William family and that I could live well on my own. But at that time, my grandmother thought that after she passed away, I would be all alone in the world, without even a single family member, which was really pitiful. She became obsessed with the idea of me marrying into the William family, and no amount of persuasion worked. "Emma, if I don't arrange things properly for you, I won't be able to close my eyes in peace," she said firmly. I had no choice. In fact, the William family looked down on me. Before the wedding, William's mother, my future mother-in-law, came to me privately and made a request. She said that I could only get the marriage certificate after giving birth to a child. I thought about it and agreed. At that time, I thought that getting married was just to give my grandmother an explanation. It was okay not to have a marriage certificate. "It's better not to tell your grandmother about this. She's seriously ill now and can't bear any stimulation," Mrs. Williams said in a threatening tone. I originally thought that this was an ordinary marriage in form. As long as it could satisfy my grandmother, it was worth it. After my grandmother passed away, I could leave freely. However, I didn't expect that I would fall in love with William. In the first year of our marriage, he was really nice to me. I had just graduated and was still looking for a job, but William arranged for me to work in the general manager's office of the William Group. Every morning, he drove me to work together. After work, he would wait for me to leave together. In front of colleagues, he would gently hold my hand and leave. People in the office were talking about how I must have saved the galaxy in my previous life to be able to marry such an excellent and devoted President William. At that time, William arranged everything regarding my grandmother's hospitalization. Once, when my grandmother was in critical condition and was admitted to the ICU, he accompanied me to keep watch in the hospital all night and kept comforting me. Moreover, William himself was an outstanding leader. Working in the same company, I could see his decisiveness and boldness in handling business affairs. People all have the psychology of admiring the strong. It was hard not to be attracted to someone who was outstanding in all aspects when spending every day with him. When I learned that I was pregnant, I was overjoyed. I told William the good news immediately. It was obvious that he was also happy. However, the next moment, he suggested that I quit my job and stay at home to take good care of the fetus. I had always been gentle in character and was not good at arguing or resisting. Coupled with my admiration for him in my heart, I subconsciously agreed. "By the way, William, when are we going to get the marriage certificate? The baby needs to register for household registration when it's born." I looked at him and asked. He stared at me for a few seconds, expressionless. After a while, he said calmly, "We'll talk about it later." Looking at his receding back, a strong sense of uneasiness rose in my heart. It seemed that something was wrong, but I couldn't tell what it was. My intuition was quite accurate. Throughout my pregnancy, William became colder and colder towards me. By the late stage of pregnancy, he often didn't come home at night. When giving birth, I had a difficult labor and was in pain in the hospital all night. It was not until dawn, just before the baby was born, that he arrived at the hospital. As soon as I finished the 1-month confinement after giving birth, my grandmother passed away. I always felt that she had been holding on with great effort. Only when she saw that I had given birth to a baby and thought that my life would be stable in the future did she dare to close her eyes in peace. I was heartbroken. Coupled with the damage to my body caused by the difficult labor, I was extremely weak. Mrs. William used the excuse that I couldn't take care of the baby and forcibly took the baby away. I cried and begged William to bring our baby back, but he just said coldly that I should take good care of my own body first. At that time, I was in despair and had thought about leaving. But I couldn't bear to part with the child. That was the child I had struggled to give birth to. Sunday was the day I looked forward to the most every week because I could see him. Looking at the baby's tender face and watery eyes, that sense of satisfaction could resist all negative emotions. For the sake of the child, I once again proposed to William to get the marriage certificate. He looked at me with a condescending and contemptuous look and sneered. "I thought you had more backbone. It turns out you're just like your grandmother who liked to climb the social ladder." I clenched my fists and trembled with anger. "What do you mean? I, William, have never been a person who can be coerced. When your grandmother forced me to repay the favor with marriage back then, I secretly swore that one day I would make you regret it." I looked at him in despair. So, were all those in the past fake? Were all those past kindnesses, the affectionate gazes you gave me, fake? William curled his lips and said in a cold tone, "What do you think?" After leaving William's family, I didn't know where to go. In this world, I no longer had any other family members. Just as my grandmother had worried, I became all alone. However, it didn't seem that bad. I didn't feel lonely or afraid. I could be fine on my own. Since I couldn't think of where to go, I just didn't think about it. I directly found a hotel to stay in. Every day, I watched TV, scrolled through my phone, ate, and slept. I didn't have to get up early to make hand-ground coffee for William. I didn't have to worry about Mrs. Williams suddenly calling and scolding me for some inexplicable reasons. I didn't have to study various parenting knowledge all day long but have no chance to use it. I could lie in bed all day, empty my mind, and think about nothing. One day, when I was bored and turned on the TV, I happened to see a TV series filmed in Dali. The scenery in it was incredibly beautiful and attracted me deeply. I immediately jumped out of bed and booked a plane ticket to Yunnan for the next morning. While waiting at the airport, I received a call from the housekeeper of William's old house. "Madam, I'll send the young master over later. Please wait at home." Only then did I remember that today was Sunday. I had unconsciously spent a week in the hotel. Moreover, it seemed that the old house didn't know that I hadn't been home for a week. Hearing the airport announcement calling my flight number, I hurriedly said, "Don't come over. I'm not at home." And then I hung up the phone. As soon as I got on the plane, the phone rang again. Once I answered it, Oliver's childish but angry voice rang out, "Bad mom. You don't want to see me, and I don't want you either. Dad said that he won't let you come home, Before I could react, the phone was hung up again. I was stunned for a long time before I smiled helplessly. In these past few years, because I couldn't bear to part with Oliver, I forced myself to stay in William's family. In order to be able to see the child normally, I compromised with William and tried my best to please him. At that time, as soon as he frowned, I would be extremely nervous. I was afraid that if he got angry, he wouldn't let me see Oliver again. I was like all those self-deceiving mothers, trying to maintain the appearance of a complete family for the sake of the child. This kind of self-moving behavior was rather ridiculous. Because the child didn't need it. Oliver was raised in the old house, and I only saw him once a week. Even though every time we met, I tried my best to coax him and accompany him, I still helplessly found that he was becoming more and more unfamiliar with me. Every Sunday's gathering was just like a task for him. As soon as it was afternoon, he would clamor to go back. I have to admit that Oliver really didn't seem to need me as his mother. He didn't like me either. Then I'll do as he wishes and won't bother him in front of him in the future. Dolly was even more beautiful than what I saw on TV. I rented a homestay. Every day, I went out for a walk, enjoyed the beautiful scenery, and tasted delicious food. It was really pleasant. The pure air here seemed to be able to cleanse people's hearts. I couldn't help but calm down and start to think. Think about my life and future. In the past, I had always been passive. I passively accepted my parents' death, passively listened to my grandmother's words, and passively maintained the marriage for the sake of the child. It seemed that I had never taken the initiative to do anything for myself. I thought that in the future, I would live well for myself. Leaning on the windowsill of the homestay and looking at the clear blue sky outside, I began to think about what I wanted to do. I used to have dreams too. It wasn't any grand goal. I had never been ambitious since I was a child, and I had never thought about making a lot of money or achieving great success or anything like that. I just want to live an ordinary and peaceful life of my own. When I was in college, I once thought that I could open my own bookstore in the future and provide a place for like-minded friends to gather and relax. It doesn't matter even if I can't make money. Because I don't seem to be short of money now. After my grandmother passed away, she left me a sum of money. As she requested, I sold the house under her name after her death. Although it wasn't very big, the house in Beijing was still worth some money. All that money has been deposited in my bank card and hasn't been touched at all. When I got married, the William family gave me 10 million yuan as betrothal gifts, plus several sets of jewelry, and I haven't touched any of these. After marriage, William gave me 300,000 yuan for household expenses every month, while my monthly expenses never exceeded 20,000 yuan at most. Because whether it was Oliver's life and study or various household expenses, the housekeeper and servants of the William family would take care of them, so I didn't need to worry about them. I basically didn't have any place where I needed to spend money. The biggest expense in normal times was buying various toys and gifts for Oliver. Once, William's cousin learned about the monthly expenses that William gave me and sneered, "So my brother is using this little money to humiliate you. It seems that he really doesn't like you. No wonder he just gave you 10 million yuan to send you away when you got married." For them, 300,000 yuan a month is humiliation, and giving 10 million yuan as betrothal gifts is just sending someone away casually. Perhaps I'm really not suitable for the world of the rich. The young ladies and rich wives in their circle would casually spend hundreds of thousands of yuan on buying a bag or going to a beauty salon. When it comes to betrothal gifts and dowries, they are often commercial buildings, shops, real estate, and shares. Compared with them, 10 million yuan really seems insignificant. My consumption behavior and habits are regarded by them as being petty and not presentable. However, I didn't take it to heart. Originally, I stayed there just for the child, not because I wanted to integrate into their circle. The money in my hand might be nothing to them. But based on my material desires and consumption habits, it might not be spent up in my whole life. Now, I have the confidence to realize my wish and open a bookstore. Before leaving Dolly, I called William. The phone rang until the last ring, and he didn't pick it up until just before it was about to be automatically hung up. "Realize your mistake?" Before I could say anything, he continued talking on his own. "This time, you've gone too far. As a punishment, you can't see Oliver for 3 months. William," I interrupted him, "we didn't get a marriage certificate when we got married before." He seemed to chuckle slightly, as if he was in a good mood. "So you really want to get the marriage certificate with me? It's not impossible, but it's impossible recently. You've made a mistake, and I won't consider this matter for the time being. Stella is still unhappy about what happened last time. If you come back and apologize to her, maybe I will." I was thinking in my mind, who is Stella? "Oh, she's the girl who asked me to make coffee for her, William's mistress. Did you hear what I said?" Seeing that I didn't respond, he raised his voice a bit. I said calmly, "Since we didn't get a marriage certificate, if we separate, we don't need to go through the divorce procedures." The voice on the other side suddenly stopped. After a while, he said with anger in his voice, "What do you mean?" "William, let's break up." "Do you know what you're talking about?" "Yes. We don't need to see each other again in the future. I won't return the 10 million yuan that your family gave when we got married. Just consider it as compensation for giving birth to Oliver." "Okay, very good." He seemed to laugh angrily. "You don't want to see Oliver again in the future?" Looking at the hung-up phone, I smiled helplessly. The child that I gave birth to with great pain seemed to have become a tool for him to manipulate and threaten me. For the sake of the child, I compromised and endured again and again, swallowing my pride. As he wished, the child wasn't close to me and didn't like me as his mother at all. This is also the main reason why I could make up my mind to leave resolutely. I returned to a small county town in the south. It was the place where I lived when I was a child. Before my parents passed away, our family of 3 lived here. My mother grew up in Beijing. At that time, when she was going to marry far away to this place, my grandmother didn't agree at first. Later, she was touched by my father's character and finally handed my mother over to him. My mother said that although she grew up in Beijing, she didn't like the dry air there at all. She liked this small southern town, which was warm and humid and made people feel comfortable. I thought to myself that I was indeed my mother's child and had the same feelings as her. Although I went to Beijing later and lived there for many years, I never got used to it. Deep down in my heart, what I liked was still the small town where I was born. When I wanted to find a place to settle down, the first thought that popped into my mind was this place. The house where I lived when I was a child had been sold long ago. I searched for a long time and chose a house with a yard in the old urban area. There was a room in front of the small yard, which happened to face the street and was used as a storefront before. I decorated this room into a bookstore. The several rooms behind the small yard were decorated by me as the place where I lived. The living room, bedroom, kitchen, dining room, and bathroom were all available. In the yard, I planted all kinds of flowers and plants. The decorated home was as beautiful as I had imagined. On a sunny and pleasant day, I moved into my new home and held a small opening ceremony for the bookstore. The business of the bookstore was just as I expected, not very good. Occasionally, some nearby students would come in to read books, but most of the time, there were very few customers. That's okay. It's quieter, and I can sit behind the counter and concentrate on writing novels. When I was in college, I had a hobby of writing. From time to time, I could publish short stories in some magazines. I also once wrote a medium-length online novel, which had a good response, accumulated some readers, and earned a considerable amount of manuscript fees. When I was in college, my plan for the future was to work in a magazine or a publishing house after graduation and write novels in my spare time. However, as soon as I graduated, at William's request, I entered his company. Then I got married to him, gave birth to a child, and later abandoned writing. Now, I want to gradually cultivate this hobby again. Doing what I like and living a good life is my plan for my future. One day, I was typing words in the store when it suddenly started to rain heavily outside. The rain was pattering against the window glass. After a while, a large area of water had spread at the door. A tall and straight young man riding a shared bicycle hurriedly parked the bike at the door of the bookstore, jumped off it, and rushed over. He held something in his arms that he took from the bike basket. "Boss, can I take shelter from the rain here?" He stood under the eaves, lowered his head to wipe the thing in his hand with his hand, and asked me loudly. "It's okay. Come inside," I said with a smile. "No, I'm all wet. I don't want to dirty your floor." He raised his head, wiped the drops of water on his forehead with his sleeve, and was stunned when he saw me. I also saw his face clearly and couldn't help thinking that he was really handsome. He wasn't the kind of handsome with fair and delicate features, but had a wheatish complexion, sharp facial lines, sword-like eyebrows, and starry eyes, a very masculine kind of handsomeness. A few seconds passed. After I had a good look at him, he finally came to his senses. He looked surprised and said, "Emma? When did you come back? You know me?" I was surprised. I was quite sure that I didn't know this tall and heroic handsome young man in front of me. He grinned, showing his white teeth. "I'm Jolin." "Jolin?" I frowned and thought for a while, but still had no memory of him. 17 years ago, there was a fire in the shopping mall in the city center. Your father saved me, and then he. With his words, my memory was suddenly brought back to many years ago. Before I was 10 years old, I had a happy family. My parents loved each other deeply, and they both doted on me. But when I was 10 years old, all of this disappeared suddenly like bubbles. My father was a firefighter. When a fire broke out in the shopping mall in the city center, he went in with his colleagues to save people. Fortunately, all the people in the shopping mall were saved that day. But my father and another firefighter uncle sacrificed their lives in that big fire. Not long after my father's funeral was over, my mother was hit and flown away by a truck when she was riding an electric bike because she was in a trance, and she died on the spot. In an instant, I became an orphan without parents. Later, my grandmother came to take me to live in Beijing. Not long after I arrived at my grandmother's house, my grandfather also passed away. I fell into deep self-blame. I was thinking whether I was the kind of person with bad luck in TV dramas who would bring misfortune to all the relatives around me one by one. First my parents, and then my grandfather. Because of self-loathing, I became inferior, timid, and gloomy. Although my grandmother later found that something was wrong with me and took me to see a psychologist, the cowardice in my bones had already taken root deeply. "I'm sorry," Jolin's words pulled me back from my memory. "If it weren't for saving us, Emma, your father wouldn't have." "It's okay. That was my father's job responsibility," I said sincerely. Once, I also complained in my heart. Why did my father go to save those people? Why did he leave my mother and me behind? My mother had an accident because she was too sad. Couldn't he cherish his own life for our sake? Later, as I grew up, my thoughts gradually matured, and I also let go and reconciled with myself. I began to understand my father. His character and sense of responsibility made him go all out in every job. Such a character was also the reason why my mother liked him at first. He was just such a person. He was proud of his job and was full of pride whenever he mentioned his work. So, I don't blame him anymore. I should also be proud of his job. Oh, by the way, look at this. Do you still have any impression? Jolin held up the small ceramic flower pot in his hand. What's this? I took the flower pot in surprise. Mine. The familiar flower pot brought back my memories. This was made by my father when he took me to the pottery workshop when I was a child. On the bottom of the flower pot, there were the two crooked words Emma written by me. Later, I seemed to take it home and planted a cactus in it. If I hadn't seen it again, I would have almost forgotten this small flower pot. Why is this in your hands? I was curious, holding the flower pot and rubbing it again and again. Jolin smiled. Actually, I went to your house later, but you had already moved away. In his narration, I understood the whole story. After being rescued by that tall firefighter uncle in the shopping mall, he was still conscious. Although the firefighter uncle was wearing a mask and his face couldn't be seen clearly, he heard someone beside him call his name. After he recovered, he went to the fire brigade with his parents to give a silk banner to the uncle who saved him. But he learned that the uncle had sacrificed his life not long after rescuing him at that time. Their whole family was very sad. Later, he heard that the wife of that firefighter also died accidentally, and only the 10-year-old daughter was left in the family. His parents discussed and decided to adopt that girl. They even decorated a room at home, which was painted in the colors that little girls liked, pink and creamy yellow. He happily thought that he was going to have a sister. Unfortunately, they were one step too late. They didn't even have time to see the girl before she was taken away by her grandmother. He was very disappointed at that time and even cried in front of the door of that firefighter uncle's house. It was also at that door that he saw the small flower pot in the corner, with a small cactus in it. There were the words Emma on the bottom of the flower pot. He knew that it was the name of that sister, so he took the flower pot home. I've never raised flowers before. I took good care of that cactus, but it died within a week, Jolene said a bit embarrassedly. I burst out laughing. Did you water it every day? How did you know? He also laughed. I didn't know until later that cacti shouldn't be watered every day. Because when I first started raising cacti, I also watered them every day and killed several of them. The one you picked up was the one that I had raised for the longest time. Oh? How long did you raise it? 51 days. I said with pride. Both of us laughed. By the way, what did you bring this flower pot out for? I asked. He pointed to a corner at the bottom of the flower pot. See, it's broken here. My cat knocked it onto the ground. I searched for a long time and finally found a shop that repairs porcelain. It was finally repaired today. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It's just a broken flower pot. It's okay if it's broken. Is it worth repairing? He held the flower pot and said seriously, it's worth it. Jolene and I gradually became familiar with each other. As soon as he got off work, he would run to my bookstore, vying to help me receive customers and clean up. Every time he entered the door, he would say, the great writer can focus on creating. Just leave the store to me. After learning that his occupation was a firefighter, I was very surprised. Since I was rescued that time, my wish has become to be a firefighter when I grow up. Fortunately, I've realized my wish. When talking about his occupation, he was very proud. That tone was similar to that of my father back then. Congratulations, I said, sincerely happy for him. After we got familiar with each other, Jolene asked me carefully why I had returned to my hometown. He scratched his head. Actually, I've seen you before and knew that you were married. I went to college in Beijing. After graduation, I went back to attend a classmate's wedding once and happened to meet you in the shopping mall. I didn't know what you looked like. I just heard someone beside you call you Emma when we passed by each other. This name was deeply rooted in my heart. I suddenly turned my head and saw you. At that time, I wasn't sure. Later, I went to inquire secretly and then knew that you were the daughter of my benefactor. At that time, you were about to get married. Your wedding was very grand. I sneaked in to watch it. You smiled very sweetly. Emma, what happened? Why did you come back to settle down alone? Jolene's voice was very gentle, as if he was afraid of hurting me. The concern on his face was also sincere. It's okay if you don't want to talk about it. I got divorced, I said in a calm tone. To be precise, it was a breakup. Because although we had a child together, we didn't get a marriage certificate. Over the years, I had been used to digesting my emotions alone slowly and burying all my thoughts deep in my heart. I thought that I had lost the ability to share. However, when facing someone who truly cared about me, I found that my desire to share was surprisingly strong. I told him about all my experiences over the years in an unhurried manner. When I was talking, my tone was calm, and I could even laugh at myself. But Jolene was moved to tears. I looked at him a bit amusedly. Why are you crying? They were actually willing to hurt you like this, he said as another tear fell. Emma, you've suffered a lot. From his eyes, I understood a long-lost emotion. The emotion that had once appeared in the eyes of my parents, grandparents. It was heartache. He was feeling sorry for me. After so many years, I experienced the feeling of being cared for again. My heart suddenly warmed up. Some feelings among adults are tacitly understood. I began to silently accept Jolene's care and concern for me, because I found that it was very comfortable to be with him and there was no discomfort or resistance at all. He observed and guessed my habits and hobbies from the details, and he knew me better than I knew myself. Once when we went to the night market to have barbecue, I didn't touch the squid skewers and he knew that I didn't eat squid. Later, when we ate out, he never ordered dishes related to squid again. When helping me order milk tea, I said once that I wanted it with 30% sugar and he remembered it. Later, every time he bought milk tea for me, it was with 30% sugar. He seemed rough on the surface, but in fact, he was delicate inside. Just like a cup of warm boiled water, it moistens you quietly and makes you feel comfortable everywhere. Over time, you will become dependent on it. One evening, it was time for Zhou to get off work, but he didn't come to the bookstore as usual. After more than an hour, he still hadn't come, and I became a bit worried. I couldn't care less about being reserved and quickly called him, but no one answered. I started to panic. I searched for the local breaking news and learned that there was a fire in a factory in the western suburbs. I immediately took a taxi and rushed there. When I arrived there, the fire had already been put out. Looking at the firefighters who had just come out of the factory, I scanned around but didn't find Zhou figure. My heart started to beat violently out of control, and my hands began to shake. The back view of my father leaving 17 years ago appeared in my mind. I shook my head and murmured to myself, no, it's impossible. Suddenly, a familiar figure appeared in front of me. Emma, why are you here? At that moment, all my emotions rushed out. I burst into tears and threw myself into his arms. You scared me to death. Zhou, I thought something had happened to you, whoa. Be good, don't cry. I'm fine, aren't I? While talking, he gently patted my back to comfort me. When I calmed down, he held my cheeks in his hands and looked straight into my eyes. From the way you were just now, can I understand that you care about me a lot? I didn't want to struggle with it anymore and nodded without hesitation. Yes, I care about you, very much. I'll be worried and think a lot when I can't see you, Emma, let's be together. His eyes were bright with stars shining in them. Okay, after experiencing the ups and downs of emotions just now, I thought that nothing was more important than cherishing the present. I didn't want to think too much anymore. I just wanted to follow my heart and be unrestrained and happy for once. 3 months after being with Zhou, we got our marriage certificate. When we walked out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, Zhou hugged me tightly. Emma, don't be afraid. You have a family now. I'm your family and will never leave you. Tears slid down from the corners of my eyes. It turned out that he had always understood me. He knew my inner uneasiness, my longing for a family, and the incomplete part in my heart. When we got home, Zhou started cooking. He served steak and red wine. So grand? I raised my eyebrows. Just kidding. It's a big day for getting the marriage certificate. Of course, we should celebrate it well, he said as he sat down opposite me. My parents haven't come back from their trip yet, but I called them and told them about getting the certificate, and they were also very happy. They also said that when they come back, they will start preparing for the wedding and will definitely not let you be wronged. I saved some money by myself in the past 2 years, and with part of the support from my parents, I bought a small house as our future wedding house. It's the one you went to see before. It's not big, but fortunately, it was paid in full, so we don't need to worry about the mortgage. I'm going to start decorating it this month. If you have any opinions or like any style, you can tell me. I smiled and said, let's have dinner first. We can talk about other things later. No, he said seriously. Starting from today, we are husband and wife. I need to tell you clearly about all my situations. Now, there's only the last item left. He took out a card from his pocket and handed it to me. This is my salary card. I quickly shook my head, no. If you give it to me, what will you do when you need money? You can give me pocket money. I just like being taken care of by you. He insisted on putting the salary card into my hand. While we were pushing it back and forth, the doorbell rang. I immediately got up and rushed to open the door. Looking at the father and son standing outside the door, I was stunned. Mom. Oliver hugged my leg and looked up at me. I touched his head and asked, why are you here? William didn't answer my question and walked straight into the house. Seeing Zhou sitting in the dining room, he looked unhappy and turned to me. Who is he? Before I could answer, he took a look around and continued talking on his own. After leaving me, you live in such a small house and wrong yourself? I looked around and wondered in my heart. Isn't this house nice? It couldn't be compared with William's big villa of several hundred square meters, but it was also spacious, bright, warm, and comfortable. Right, this place is nice, better than William's, I said truthfully. Don't be stubborn. William's smile was full of disdain. When you were with me, the servants took care of you every day, and you didn't have to do anything. Everything you ate and used was exquisite. How could you adapt to such a rough life? Last time I made you lose face because of another woman. It's understandable that you were angry. I won't care about that anymore. I've already sent Stella away and came to pick you up in person. You'd better not be pretentious. This is your last chance. I know you've always wanted to get the marriage certificate. In the future, no need. I interrupted directly, not wanting to see his superior look anymore. I won't go back with you. This is my home. Also, I'm already married. Don't bother me again in the future. William no longer looked calm. He suddenly looked at me, and his pupils dilated in shock. What did you say? Zhou walked over, took my hand, and looked calm. Sir, today is a big and happy day for me and Emma. I won't care about your nonsense. Please leave our home immediately. A trace of confusion flashed in William's eyes. What big and happy day. We got our marriage certificate today. We are a legal couple. So, William, please leave. I won't go back to Beijing again. After being stunned for a while, William said, this joke isn't funny at all. I'm not joking with you, William. I'm married. Oliver suddenly rushed over, hugged my leg, and his eyes were full of tears. Mom, don't you want me anymore? I squatted down and tried to make my voice as gentle as possible. Oliver, although Mom isn't by your side anymore, Mom will always love you. If you miss Mom, you can video chat with Mom. When you're on holiday in the future, you can also come to play with Mom. Although Oliver had never been close to me and had even said hurtful words to me before, I had never blamed him. He was just a 3-year-old child. What did he know? He had been separated from me since he was a child and only saw me once a week. How could there be time to cultivate feelings? It was quite normal that he wasn't close to me. Perhaps, our mother-son bond was rather shallow. Oliver looked at me and nodded as if he understood something. The day before the wedding, William came to find me again. He stood at the door of the bookstore with a gloomy look on his face. I want to talk to you. Jolin, who was sitting beside, stood up. You two talk. I'll go out for a walk. Seeing Jolin walk out, William turned to look at me. I admit, you win. Divorce him, and we'll get the marriage certificate immediately. What nonsense are you talking about? You got married to another man out of spite, isn't it to force me to give in? Are you being too self-obsessed? William chuckled. Otherwise? How can the man you found compare with me? Emma, the person you love is me. I can see it in your eyes. I quietly looked at the man in front of me with a determined look on his face. After a long while, I suddenly smiled. It turned out that he had always known that I loved him. But because he was forced to get married, he couldn't swallow that anger in his heart and tortured me psychologically to find a balance. Then look into my eyes now. Can you still see the love for you? The person in front of me was stunned. William, I admit that I loved you before. But later, I found that you're not worthy of my love. I stayed in the William family because of Oliver. Otherwise, I would have left long ago. Something seemed to break in his eyes, and the pain was obvious. Impossible. You want to take revenge on me, right? I admit that I really hurt you in the past few years. I apologize to you. As long as you're willing to come back, I'll make up for it. I didn't have no feelings for you at all in these years. I laughed out loud. William, you're really a coward. Is it that hard to admit that you like me? Is it so hard for you to say that you like someone like me? Since you look down on me, then why did you wrong yourself to stay with me? That's not what I mean, he said in a bit of a hurry. Of course, even if you admit that you like me, I won't go with you. Because the person I love now isn't you. He suddenly raised his head, and his eyes were red. How could you like him? I don't believe it. Yes, as you said, he indeed can't compare with you in many aspects. But he's gentle, kind, patient, and understands me. He has many good qualities. Most importantly, as a partner, I'm the only one in his eyes. William fell into silence again. Just when I thought he was going to leave, he suddenly said in a hoarse voice, what if I can change? I can also make sure that you're the only one in my heart and eyes, and I'll never look at another woman again. I shook my head firmly. My feelings for you have been worn away in these years. Emma, think about Oliver. He's our child. Don't you want him to have a complete family? When we go back, I'll bring Oliver over, and the three of us will live together, okay? When he said the latter part, his voice trembled slightly. But I just laughed softly. It turned out that Oliver could be brought back. In the past few years, he clearly knew how much I missed Oliver and how many times I begged him to bring the child back, but he cruelly refused every time. Now he said that the three of us could live together. How ridiculous. I raised my head and looked at him firmly. Since Oliver was born, you've been using him to manipulate me. In the future, he can no longer be a tool for you to threaten me. Because I've learned to love myself. From now on, I'll put myself first, and no one will be able to hurt me anymore. William left in a dejected manner. Jolin rushed in with quick steps and hugged me in a panic. I struggled and said, your arm is hurting me. He loosened his arm a little but didn't let me go. I'm sorry, Emma, I was just too scared. Scared of what? Scared that you would go with him, scared that you wouldn't want me. I held his face in my hands and smiled softly. Silly, I'm your wife. How could I go with someone else? But you haven't told me that you love, Shh. I interrupted him. What's tomorrow? Our wedding. Don't you want to hear a confession at the wedding? He nodded vigorously. Right. He slapped his own head. I still need to go back and go over the wedding process with the master of ceremonies. Tomorrow is our important day, and nothing can go wrong. Oh no, I have a bad memory. What if I forget my lines when I'm nervous tomorrow? He suddenly became anxious and paced around the room a few times. I won't stay with you. I'll go back to prepare now. I might as well stay up all night. After rushing to the door, he suddenly turned around and waved to me with a bright smile. Emma, wait for me to marry you tomorrow. Extra, from William's perspective, I had never thought that just because of a cup of coffee, Emma would leave me and never come back. At first, I thought she was just throwing a tantrum. Emma had always been obedient in front of me. That day when she left the banquet directly, I was also a bit angry. So on Sunday, I took Oliver out to play as a punishment for her disobedience, but she didn't come home for a whole week. Another Sunday, even on the day when Oliver was supposed to come, she still refused to come back. I was really angry. In the past, whenever we had some small conflicts, it was always her who took the initiative to compromise. I just wanted to see how long she could hold out this time. That day when the phone rang and I saw her name flashing, I almost pressed the answer button immediately. But I didn't want to seem so eager, so I waited until the last second of the ring to pick it up. I really wanted to ask her where she had been recently and how she was doing. But when I opened my mouth, what I said was, realize your mistake. I also said that as a punishment, she couldn't see Oliver for 3 months. But I was just saying it. Because she had been away for too long, I didn't want her to get into the habit of running away from home. She had to pay a price so that she wouldn't dare to leave easily again in the future. When I heard her say, we didn't get a marriage certificate when we got married before, the corners of my mouth curled up unconsciously. So, all this fuss was for getting the marriage certificate. It was something that would happen sooner or later anyway. I deliberately didn't agree just to tease her. Maybe my temper had been spoiled by Emma. I was used to her giving in and being in a superior position. Even though I really wanted her to come back, I still stubbornly said that she should apologize to Stella. When I heard her cold voice saying, let's break up, my head was buzzing. I couldn't believe what I had heard. That I had always thought that when Emma said she was leaving, it was just angry words. After all, Oliver was still here. How could she bear to leave? I had seen how much she loved the child. I thought, well, it seemed that she was really angry this time. If she wanted to go out and relax, then let her go. When she hit a snag outside, she would realize how good it was in the William family. In these past few years, I had taken good care of her, and she definitely wouldn't be used to the rough life outside, but she had been gone for months without a word. She didn't even make a single phone call to Oliver. I started to panic. I asked someone to investigate her whereabouts. When my assistant sent me her address, I hurriedly took Oliver and flew there. I didn't even bother to look at the other investigation information that the assistant sent at the same time. When I learned that she had gotten married, it was like a blow to my head. It took me a long time to recover. I couldn't believe it. How could she marry someone else? Didn't she want me or Oliver anymore? The day before her wedding, I went to find her. I wanted to make one last effort. But she said that she didn't love me anymore. I could see from her eyes that she had really let go of the past. I had lost her forever. On the day of the wedding, I watched from a distance. She held the microphone and confessed to the groom, I love you. I was deeply jealous. She had never said that she loved me. At that moment, her smile was so bright, and her eyes were filled with happiness. But my heart was broken. Her happiness wasn't given by me. Sometimes I would wonder when I fell in love with Emma. Perhaps I fell in love with her the first time we met. We were sitting together having a meal. Her smile was a bit timid, and her eyes were as pure and innocent as a fawn's. She was so pretty and cute that people couldn't help liking her and wanting to possess her. I only realized it later. In fact, marrying Emma wasn't completely forced. With my personality, if I didn't want to, no one could force me. I agreed to get married actually because I had already accepted her deep down in my heart. But I didn't understand it at that time. I was angry that my marriage was being manipulated and used as a tool to repay a favor. Emma, a young girl who had never been in love before, was so innocent and easy to deceive. After marriage, I deliberately treated her well and took care of her in every way. Sure enough, soon I saw admiration and infatuation for me in her eyes. When she got pregnant, I gradually distanced myself from her. This was my revenge. From childhood to adulthood, I had never been forced to do anything. Her grandmother was the first one. Then I could only take revenge on her. After the child was born, when she mentioned getting the marriage certificate again, I severely ridiculed her and her grandmother. When my mother took Oliver away, I didn't object either. At that time, she really didn't have the energy to take care of the child. Not long after the difficult labor, her grandmother passed away. She was as fragile as a thin piece of paper. I wanted her to have a good rest and recover her health, but later, seeing that she was becoming colder and colder towards me, I started to panic. I couldn't bear that her eyes no longer looked at me with infatuation. That I wanted to hold her face and force her to look at me. So, I did something stupid. I started to threaten her with Oliver. As long as she didn't obey, I wouldn't let her see Oliver. Sure enough, she became obedient. Even when I was with other women outside, she didn't say a word, but I was still unhappy. She was like a rag doll, at my mercy and unable to resist. But she had no expression on her face. I wanted her to show some emotion, even if it was just anger. I started to do even more excessive things to provoke her. Our marriage fell into such a vicious cycle, but I was powerless to change it. Later, I realized that I was wrong from the very beginning. I regretted letting my mother take Oliver away. She and Oliver had so few opportunities to meet that Oliver didn't have much affection for her. Because the child didn't cling to her, she could leave so resolutely. If Oliver had been with her since he was born and they had a deep bond as mother and son, she would never have been able to bear to abandon the child no matter what. Even for the sake of the child, she wouldn't have left the William family. I also regretted that I shouldn't have asked her to make coffee for Stella that day. Because of my angry words, she left forever. She left so resolutely and never looked back. I often regretted that I hadn't seen my own feelings earlier. I regretted that I hadn't treated her better before. Why did I always make her bow her head and admit her mistakes? Why did I force her again and again? What stupid things had I done? Obviously, I was a man, but I didn't protect her well. I let her get hurt again and again until she was finally in despair. I thought that I would probably spend the rest of my life in regret. All kinds of regrets would overwhelm and devour me. They would make me unable to sleep or eat well and break my heart. This was my retribution. That night, I had a dream. In the dream, Emma and I were having a wedding. She was wearing a beautiful wedding dress, looking at me with a smile on her lips. I took her hand and ran off the stage. "William, where are we going?" "To get the marriage certificate," I said loudly. "This time, I must hold you tightly and never let you go."